In my presentation, I would like to discuss the impact of gut health and gut integrity on animal performance. And what I would like to do is to bridge, to some extent, those modern technologies which were discussed and explained during the last 2 days, especially the omics technologies, to the practical application in animal nutrition, which relates a little bit to the last question, which was addressed to Alessandra. As I try to, 1 second, it doesn't work yet. Is this the right one? Perfect. Now it works. We need to have a look a little bit back on the history of livestock science, animal science, on how science was done and how science is done today. A little bit like the evolution shown by Erich yesterday from the baby boomers to the last generations. Also the methodologies changed significantly in the field of livestock research. When the macroscopic research was done intensively in the early days of livestock research, of course this is still done today, and daily weight gain, feed conversion rate parameters are still of relevance. Soon the science went one step deeper on organ level, to better understand the efficacy of an organ, especially expressed related to animal nutrition in digestibility of nutrients. Later, technology is allowed to dig deeper on tissue level and to understand better how tissue is reacting and interacting with the gut microbiota. In the recent years, we spent a lot on cellular level and to understand better the role of the enterocytes, the role of bacteria in the digestive tract. Our question, or the answers we got here, were mainly on the question, who is there? We could identify who is there. And today, we are facing a new technology or a group of technologies which gives us a much bigger access. These are the technologies which open the door on the molecular level. And this is what happens, this is research which happens on DNA, mRNA level. The term genomics is well known, is heavily used, is difficult to be explained and is difficult to be used for practical terms. That's why a series of other technologies developed during the years, which are called the transcriptomics, which is simply the transcription from DNA on mRNA level, the proteomics, telling us which of these mRNA is converted into a protein, and finally the metabolomics, telling us which impact those proteins do have on the metabolites produced by such an intestinal or tissue cell. And please allow me, I try to simplify a little bit these omics technologies in order to better understand this one. In many cases, the enterocyte, the gut cell, reacts on an external factor, which can be a bacterium, which can be a toxin, which can be stress, which can be a nutrient. And this switches on or switches off some gene cascades, which translates later this information into mRNA. And this is exactly the point what we can measure in transcriptomics. What is transcripted, into the mRNA. Or we can measure what is translated into protein with proteomics technologies, and last but not least, the same on how is it called? Metabolomics, so now I got it. These technologies give some insight, give some new possibilities in livestock research. So that's okay, that's the omics technologies. And many of you might ask, what has this to do with gut health? Let me first start with the topic why gut health, and why gut health is, especially today, in our current situation in livestock production, one of the major drivers, also for research. And let me start this section, this part, with a sentence which was shaped by a colleague, he's even in here, Gerhard, approximately 12 years ago, before Europe banned the growth promoters. Good gut health is the best growth promoter. So if we want to replace antibiotics in future, if we want to make animals high performing, then we have to make sure that they keep on a good gut health level. Why is this so? Number one, and I will show more examples later, any inflammation, any negative impact on gut health is costly in terms of nutrients. In this case, like Webel said, 1.3 times of maintenance is required if an inflammation is going on. So this is waste of nutrients which could else be used for growth or reproduction. Number two, low gut health situations are costly in terms of financial costs. In this table, it's a bit too complex to be explained here. You see how improving feed conversion rate is impacting the feed costs per ton. So by improving gut health, the farmer, the user, is able to save even money by having better efficacy on his animal level. And number three, why gut health is there are changes ahead. The changes related to the antibiotic growth promoters. And you know that Europe started with this, let's call it trend, some 12 years ago, when several antibiotic growth promoters were banned. Korea followed, and many other countries are considering today to exit the use of the growth promoters. The country where we are in here, in Canada, seems that by end of this year, they will do a significant change, limitation, to the use of antibiotic growth promoters in livestock. And this is just one out of a list of countries which are starting with such a trend. So whether we like it or not, antibiotic growth promoters will be out of business in a few years. There is no way by. But there is a second thing, which was published recently by Ramanan. Antibiotic growth promoters lost their efficacy during the recent years. If you see here the 1950s and go up to 2010, he plotted these meta-analysis, he plotted the different results on the potential, on the growth performance potential of antibiotic growth promoters, which was high, which went up to 7-8% in the early years of usage. In the 1970s and 80s, the potential was to some extent still high, but is permanently going down. And today, after 2000, we don't find any results which show a more than 2% improvement. The same holds true for the effect on the feed conversion rate. You see a significant impact in the early years of usage and a limitation of the impact in the later years. So sometimes we might wonder why we try to stick on those substances if the consumer demands something else and the efficacy data are showing those details, like here in this nice paper. So let me bring those two questions together. Omics, what shall we do with that? And how shall we manage gut health in future? How to apply these omics technologies in gut health? And we learned a lot this morning and now recently from my previous speakers that with whole genome sequencing we can gather a lot of information from the animal on its health status, on whatever parameters we want to test on the animal. Sometimes we get the feeling that we do not see the wood for the trees, because it's a lot of information, and as Alessandra pointed out, there is a lot to learn in this technology. And this is good. This is good in terms of research. When we search for new biomarkers, when we search for new metabolic pathways, then we go in such comprehensive data, then in such comprehensive methods. BIOMIN is having a collaboration with the Singaporean Institute on this whole genome approach. I think my pointer is running out of battery. 1 second. Yeah, as I was the moderator, I know where they are. So, it's the same. Yes, so very complex data, and which is good for research purpose. But how can we apply these technologies for practical use, for our more or less day-to-day use on products and on farming? And this is something what we call the target gene approach, to identify relevant genes with an impact on animal performance, and to correlate these genes with gut health and animal performance. And this is something we try to do in our research, to have a look on on a limited amount of target genes, where we know that they have a further impact on the animal's health. I want to show you here some examples, and again, I simplify on purpose. And let me start with this goblet cell, and let us spend now some minutes here in this gut tissue cells. Here we see the impact of two molecules on this gut tissue cell. On the one hand, of phytogenics, on the other hand, of the DON. If such a goblet cell is treated with those substances, on the one hand, the phytogenics are able to target the MUC2 target genes, which are then translated into the mRNA, and we measure this with transcriptomics. The deoxynivalenol, on the other hand, is exactly blocking that. And if we see that further, what we learn here on this level with transcriptomics, we see that the mucin secretion, which is a result of the MUC2 target gene, is, in case of phytogenic application, increased, in case of deoxynivalenol, decreased. This was nicely shown in those two studies. First, in this study of the University of Athens, I really have difficulties to pronounce this name. He is a student of Professor Kostas Montsouris, who is in the audience, showing that different levels of phytogenics were leading to an upregulation of this MUC2 target gene, and in high dosage even again downregulating. On the other hand, Gunther Antonissen measured the impact of deoxynivalenol, DON, on this MUC2 formation by measuring the target genes, and we see here in the duodenum, compared to a control group, the DON as well as the fumonisin group, as well as the combination group, was leading to a significant reduction of MUC2 MUC2 target gene release. This effect was lower in the jejunum and ileum then, but what we can see is a negative impact of the mycotoxin. Let's go to the neighbor cell in the next cell, and let us stay with the DON. Again, the deoxynivalenol is impacting a cell, is influencing or blocking the transcription of the mRNA, which codes those proteins relevant for the tight junction proteins, the claudin, the occludin, and the cadherin. And as we learned earlier during this conference, these tight junction proteins, making sure that those connections between the enterocytes are tight, so that no paracellular translocation of bacteria or toxins can take place. So once DON is blocking this pathway, it comes to a blockage of the formation of these tight junction proteins, which leads to an increased paracellular transport of potential pathogens. And this was nicely shown in different studies. First of all, in this study done by BIOMIN, measuring the impact of mycotoxin on the intestinal permeability in an in vitro model. This is called TER model, where we measure the impedance between the two sides of such a tissue in an in vitro approach. And you see that compared to a control group, this impedance was significantly lower after DON was added. So this is exactly the leaky gut effect. And it could be restored again by the use of phytogenics, by a bioprotection mix. And you see that the formation of the tight junction proteins was repaired again. On the other hand, interesting study, again from Ghent University, where Gunther Antonissen studied the susceptibility of farm animals, of broiler in this case, to diseases if there is a DON intoxication in the gut. We had a similar topic this morning already to be discussed. I don't go into detail, but he found a lot of effects described in the literature. And one of them is that the translocation, the paracellular translocation of Clostridium perfringens can take place if DON disturbs those tight junction proteins and can lead to an increased risk of necrotic enteritis in broilers. So a long list of studies there. Let's go to the next cell, and this is something which relates to the topic Theo Niewold was addressing earlier. What happens if bacterial challenge takes place, if lipopolysaccharides, those bacterial toxins, are impacting such a cell? And here we know again that exactly this NF-kappa B pathway is responsible for the formation, after a bacterial challenge, for the formation of pro- and anti-inflammatory cytokines. So the same pathway, more or less simple, from the nucleus through mRNA and the formation of pro- and anti-inflammatory cytokines, leading at the end to an inflammation of the tissue. And as we learned today, inflammation is costly. Inflammation costs nutrients, costs money, and is dangerous for the animal. On the other hand, by preventing inflammation, we can expect a growth-promoting effect of a substance. What such an inflammation or an acute phase response creates in the animal, in the cell, was nicely described in this study by Todd Applegate, who gave a talk already earlier this morning, who compared 4 groups of broilers, which was challenged with the lipopolysaccharide. The green bars are the controls, which are non-challenged animals. The blue bar represents the challenged animals with lipopolysaccharides with endotoxins. The red bar represents animals which were pair-fed with the challenged ones. So they got the same amount of feed like the blue group. And then Todd tried to find out what's the impact of this LPS challenge on the health and performance of the broilers. The yellow group was then a group which was treated with LPS, so challenged, and a multi-strain probiotic was added to see the effect of this probiotic on performance as well. In this phase, on period from day 14 to 21, these birds were gaining weight. The control group was growing approximately 430, 420 grams, and we saw a significant reduction in growth during this 1 week by this LPS challenge, minus 90 grams compared to control. The red group, which did not get the toxin, but which reduced a reduced quantity of feed, pear fed with group 2, was growing better. And now, with this information, we can distinguish the effect of an inflammation on feed intake and the effect of an inflammation on the efficacy of the digestive tract. And we see that the cost of inflammation is almost 50%, and the other 50% are related due to feed intake effect. The probiotic group was, by the way, restoring significantly the effect and bringing the group to a significant higher level to be compared with the blue group. So inflammation is costly. As we mentioned earlier, 1.3 times maintenance. Glasing, he was cited already today. Inflammation consumes 10% of the nutrient intake. Sandberg, inflammation consumes 0.27 grams per kilogram body weight of ideal protein. So inflammation is costly and reduces performance. This paper from Liu showed 2 groups of piglets, a non-challenged and a challenged group, and we see that the inflammatory parameters were influenced by the addition of LPS, by the LPS challenge. But I just want to point out this one line we see is a clear negative impact from 604 gram daily weight gain down to 525 grams daily weight gain. Again, inflammation is costly and reduces performance. As we learned earlier, growth promotion requires, to some extent, anti-inflammatory compounds. And this is a way of thinking we learned a lot from Theo, also in BIOMIN research. And we are studying the effect of different substances on inflammatory parameters. And we started in vivo in a collaboration with the University of Gießen in Germany, where 3 groups of cell culture were compared and were challenged, and the impact on the pro-inflammatory cytokines, IL-8, ICAM-1, and MCP-1 were studied. And we saw that from the yellow group to the orange group, which is from a negative control to a positive control, inflammation parameters went up, and the green group received a phytogenic substance, and we see that most of the, or all of the inflammatory parameters could be reduced again. First step, in vitro. Then we went further, again with Professor Eder, and to see this effect on the animal. And again, here we found in the 3 compartments of the small intestine an impact of these. In this case, I have to explain, sorry. The blue group is a negative control group, the red group is a phytogenic number 1, and the green group is phytogenic number 2. And we saw that especially in the first part of the small intestine, in the duodenum, a significant reduction, 21 days post-weaning, in the most relevant pro-inflammatory cytokines. I'm wondering where the text is from the x-axis. That's representing the different cytokines. Anyway, so we see in the duodenum a stronger effect, in the ileum almost flat result, but showing clearly that the pro-inflammatory cytokines are downregulated by the use of phytogenics in piglets. And now the third step, what's the impact on animal performance? And if we see again those 3 groups, the feed conversion rate of these 3 groups, 1.67 in the blue group, which received the challenge and no treatment, challenge plus phytogenic 1, 1.42, and 1.39 in the third group. there was a relatively high impact of the phytogenics also on the feed conversion rate in this study. And this is exactly what I want to say. We should try to use the omics technologies to identify target genes, which give us an information also on animal performance and which can be intercorrelated. And for this, and with such an approach, we can have much better use of omics technologies in our day-to-day research. There would be another pathway, which is the antioxidative pathway, the NRF2 pathway, but we're going to skip this. Omics technologies can also be applied to the microbiome, as we learned earlier. And especially in this field, BIOMIN applies this technology in researching the resistances, the bacterial resistances against antibiotics. And with studying the resistance genes, we could quite significantly move forward in understanding, in better understanding how feed additives, modern feed additives are working as the next generation growth promoters. We have to see one thing. As long antibiotics are used, resistance genes will remain on a certain level. But not only because of the transfer of resistance gene from one germ to the other, the use of antibiotics is selecting the gut microflora from a mixed flora by killing all the non-antibiotic genes, non-antibiotic resistant genes, and the antibiotic resistant gene carrying microbes will remain. So simply by selection, the use of antibiotic growth promoters is upregulating, is increasing the level of resistance genes in a gut microflora. That's called the resistome. And this brings us to the last thought of our nice colleague here. So what's next? Where shall we apply this information in future, and in which direction shall we research? What's next? And here I would like to go deeper into one topic, which is, again, the ban of antibiotic growth promoters. In Europe, we are looking back to an 11 years experience already. As you know, the growth promoters were banned by 1st of January in 2006. Finally, this is what's always in the headlines. If you have a closer look, we see that the exit from the use of feed antibiotics took Europe almost 30 years. Already in 1972, some countries started to ban tetracyclines, penicillins, and streptomycin for the use of in-feed antibiotic growth promoter. 1986, Sweden decided to move out of the use of low-dose growth promoters. Mid of the 90s, Germany and the EU bans avoparcin. Denmark followed with a complete ban of growth promoters. 99, EU bans olaquintox and so on. And 2006, this was just the very last step in this long process. The remaining 4 growth promoters were banned. And if we look back, what did we see? What did we learn out of that? What did we learn out of the ban of growth promoters in Sweden in 1986? I summarized, I don't show all the papers here. In piglet production, a minus 10% in weight gain, a plus 2 kilogram feed per piglet, so feed conversion rate became worse, mortality increased, usage of zinc oxide increased. In broilers, increased incidence of necrotic enteritis, switched to some other penicillins and switched to coccidiostads. What did Sweden do? Sweden jumped into the cold water without any clue about potential alternative substances to the antibiotic growth promoters. 10 years later, 12 years later, in Denmark, it was already It was virginia-mycin, which was banned in 1998. And here, the impact on the industry, on the growth and health of the animals was already very limited. So this is the impact on mortality and daily weight gain in weaning pigs. And if we want to see some effect, yes, there was some effect in weaners. You see the mortality line goes up and the daily weight line goes down, but up again. At this time, the PCV2 vaccination came into game, and you see some impact on weaners, no impact on sow productivity, of course. And after some 2-3 years, the Danish authorities reported that also the resistance levels went down. In this case, the resistance levels of Enterococcus against virginia-mycin. But this is just part of the story. What we learned in Europe is that as soon Europe went out of the use of antibiotic growth promoters, this was not an immediate success. That's again Denmark, and now the timeline goes up to 2011. And what was recorded in Denmark is that even the use of antibiotic growth promoters went down. The use of antibiotics, of veterinary antibiotics, were still increasing. And of course, this was not the idea, this was not the intention of the government. And that's why in 2008, some of the countries in Europe brought a so-called yellow card system in place, which says, hey, if there is an overuse of antibiotics on certain farms, this farm will feel some consequences in order to limit the overall consumption of antibiotic growth promoters. And if you see the recent Mycotoxin report from the Netherlands, also the Netherlands in 2006, here, the use was banned, still went up 2 years, and since this time the yellow card system was brought into place, the use of antibiotic growth promoters went down. If you want to see some positive impact already, we could see some. So that's the recent data from the Mycotoxin report, and we see that in all species, broiler pigs, that the line of resistances might go down, and it is to be expected that this line goes down after the overall consumption in Europe was limited. So what did we learn? To exit the use of antibiotic growth promoters requires a holistic approach, not a one silver bullet which solves all the problems. We need, or the farmer or the industry, started at farm management, all-in, all-out systems, biosecurity systems, new veterinarian strategies, maybe some future other technologies. And of course, one significant field is the use of feed additives, which was also the reason why Denmark had a much smoother transition from the antibiotic use compared to Sweden. From a feed additive point of view, what is to be expected from substances used as novel growth-promoting substances? First of all, we have to expect that these substances do have an anti-inflammatory effect. And Theo was talking earlier on this topic, and I think we understood well the need. And Theo was shaping also very much BIOMIN's approach and approach into research in searching for novel growth promoters. So this anti-inflammatory effect, this is the paper. I took the freedom, Theo, to use this to show it here. This is the paper telling us that it is not only an antimicrobial effect, it might be mainly an anti-inflammatory effect. This is what you said here, non-antibiotic, but anti-inflammatory. And if we search for novel substances, we should have a look on the anti-inflammatory effect. And as I tried to show you earlier with the Professor Eder in Gießen and other data, we are doing intensive research in finding substances, in further developing substances with a strong anti-inflammatory effect. Number two, what's to be expected from substances as novel growth promoters? they have to have the potential for gut flora modulation. Also in order, what I mentioned earlier, for the selection of bacteria with resistant genes. And what comes into place here mainly are the novel probiotic products which can be used in that field. Number 3, and this is highly interesting, we still would expect an inhibitory effect. But inhibitory becomes a bit a new and novel sense if we talk about growth promoter replacement, or in particular antibiotic resistances. This nice article was published in Science and Solutions magazine 2 years ago. And what was found is, I zoom in, what was found is in this study in piglets is the impact of acidifiers on the survival of E. coli carrying or not carrying antibiotic resistant genes. So here you see the population, the overall population, 1 to the power of 6, of the E. coli population, without and with the use of organic acids. And you see a significant reduction here from the non-use into a use. Then we studied the E. coli population carrying resistant genes against tetracyclines, streptomycin, and sulfamethoxazole. And you see again the overall population in the non-treated and the treated with organic acids group. And the same in the group of E. coli carrying a resistant gene for ampicillin. So what do we learn out of that? We are in the lucky situation that E. coli bacteria carrying resistant genes against antibiotics are still sensitive against the novel substances, against organic acids in that case. And number 4, what has to be expected from novel growth promoters is, of course, a well-documented effect on the animals, their ability to increase performance. And I just want to show you the broiler studies here with the novel growth promoters we did. It's a long list of studies against antibiotics. And we see in this meta-analysis that, and the expected value is to get similar results like the antibiotic groups, that as well as in growth or in feed conversion rate, the novel growth promoters do have a similar potential to promote growth compared to the antibiotic groups. And even in pigs, we saw in both in daily weight gain and in feed conversion rate even a slightly better effect on performance compared to the antibiotics. So this is what I wanted to tell you on this topic, how to use omics in future or in today's and future research, and how to utilize this know-how in order to detect novel growth promoters. To summarize, the omics technologies opened a door for a deep insight in what's going on in a cell. We can ask the tissue cell not only who are you, we ask the cell what are you doing. We ask the bacteria what are you doing. The gut health is of relevance, especially in future if growth promoters will be banned, and gut health is the best growth promoter. Compared to a whole genome sequencing, a target gene approach can be a more practical application of omics technologies for a more day-to-day use. And finally, we can expect, whether we like it or not, that all countries in the world will go out of the use of the antibiotic growth promoters. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention.